Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Dose, a podcast where we speak to individuals with lived mental health experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. In this episode, we are speaking with Jacob, known in online spaces as the Nameless Narcissist. We delve into the intricacies of living with Narcissistic Personality Disorder. NPD is more than just an inflated sense of self-importance. It's a complex psychological condition that affects how individuals perceive and interact with the world. Jacob opens up about his personal journey, offering a unique perspective on the challenges and triumphs of navigating life with NPD. Throughout our discussion, Jacob provides a raw and unfiltered account of how NPD has shaped his life, particularly in the realm of forming and maintaining relationships. We explored the profound impact of NPD on his behaviour, including the struggles he has faced with issues such as anger and substance misuse. Thank you so much for being here and listening to this show. I appreciate your support so much. And please, if you are listening, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Dose. And today we have Jacob, the Nameless Narcissist. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, I'm here. Nice to meet you for the first time, and we never talked before, I swear.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. How are you, and where are you based?
Oh, fantastic. I am out of the middle of the Rust Belt in a little city called Canton, Ohio. A very unfortunate place to live, I would say.
Why unfortunate?
It's just that, so this is getting into weird history about my city, but basically, the area that I'm in, it originally was like a major manufacturing hub, but due to outsourcing and stuff like that, we basically have a lot of people went jobless, the quality of life went down. However, really cheap property. That's how I own a house at 24.
24 and you own a house?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's insane. The way that you were acting, I thought you were older than 24 as well.
I did that a lot, actually. I remember when I was in basic training, people were shocked when they learned I was 18, and I was like, do I really look that bad, guys? Come on.
Luckily, I'm small, so I get away with looking like I'm still about 18, which is
well,
great.
See, the awesome thing was I was never carded when I was underage, so that was great.
That is great. But other than that, so other than the cheap property, there's not really much else to like where you're living at the moment.
No, there is not much here, to say the least. I'm trying to get out as soon as I can, but we'll see how that pans out. I mean, given I have a house here, it makes it a little bit complicated.
Yeah, that is complicated. Although you could rent it out and make some income.
That's the plan right now, yeah. I'm very attached to this property. I don't want to let it go. What if I never own a house again? That'd be terrible.
Yeah, would it?
No.
Society says it will be, but it might not. It might be great. Maybe just live in a van forever.
I would love that, honestly. If I had a van with a shower in it and a bed, I'd be fine. I'd just be going.
I'm not sure I could do that forever, but yeah, it would be a nice, easy way of living for sure. Anyway, thank you for giving me a little bit of an insight on where you live. Now, obviously, from your name, I think the listeners have got a little bit of a clue about what we might be speaking about today. So, right. You suffer with Narcissistic Personality Disorder.
This is correct, unfortunately.
Now, the first question that I have before we go into Narcissistic Personality Disorder is, why did you choose to be, for your Instagram, on your personal brand, to be the Nameless Narcissist?
Well, so I like to think I had a couple strokes of genius when it came to my branding, so to speak. When it comes to the name itself, it was just like something that first had alliteration to it, so catchy. Yeah. Also, it was an oxymoron, which I thought not oxymoron. It was paradoxal. Well, wait, no. What maybe it is an oxymoron? I don't remember what the proper term is, but it's contradictory. It's like the Nameless Narcissist, but that is in itself a name. I thought that was fun. And
Yeah.
also, I wanted to allude to some of the, I guess, masking behaviors in quotes in narcissism of, you don't really know, I don't really know who I am. I'm always kind of putting up a performance in order to get some sort of image of myself out there, right? So it's like kind of like a faceless kind of individual who is just kind of meeting whatever expectations he feels like he has to meet.
Okay, very interesting. And that leads quite well into my next question, which is, if you could describe narcissistic personality disorder as someone who suffers with it,
Yeah.
how would you describe it?
I would describe it as a disorder where everything you do is viewed through the lens of self-esteem regulation. Basically, we are incapable of regulating ourselves and feeling good about ourselves just naturally, and we need to kind of outsource that. So basically, everything I do is kind of through that lens of what does this person think about me? What kind of feedback about myself can I get to feel good about myself? There's actually a study that was done around the neurology behind narcissistic personality. Well, this was subclinical narcissism, so take that as you will. But basically, they found that people with higher levels of subclinical narcissism, the areas of the brain that connect reward and then positive self-regard, actually had like less connectivity than in quote unquote normal people.
Right.
So their hypothesis was that to make up for that inability to feel good about yourself naturally, they have to be self-aggrandizing and attention-seeking, in order to feel good.
That makes a lot of sense. So that seeking of validation there's actually a scientific reason behind it.
Yes, at least this study
There's some
points.
evidence for that. So, what was your you're 24 now, let's revert back to your sort of childhood and teenage years. How did that look?
I was a very different person, I will say. Well, it depends how far back you go. Because I would say I started showing some signs of it around, and I was much more vulnerable presenting back then. But if you go back far enough, you see me as a child, I was very sensitive. I was very, I guess, empathic, so to speak. I remember like I literally cried once because I had this baby seal stuffed animal, and I was thinking like, oh, what's going to happen to this when I die?
Oh,
Which like was, and that's fucking nowadays, that's definitely changed. But as I grow older, some of these traits started to emerge. When I was, I think I don't remember how old I was between the ages of 8 and 12 is probably when I noticed that like I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel sad when people died. I was at a funeral wondering why everyone was being so dramatic. Like I assumed everyone else was faking to fit in or just to be attention seeking. And like after I left, I had the thought of like, what if it's me? What if I'm different? And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I also showed some grandiosity around that time. I remember like telling my sister how, oh, if this man would listen to me, we'd be rich by now, which is hilarious. But basically, and then the emotional, I would say that my emotional dysregulation hit its peak when I was in like high school. I would say that's when like most of my symptoms came out in full, and I was just like a complete fucking wreck, just yelling at everybody over the slightest provocation. Um, and then as I grew older, the traits, like a lot of narcissism stuck around, obviously. But I learned how to control my anger a lot better, and I also learned that hey, people like you better if you don't act like a narcissist.
yeah.
So I kind of developed a little bit of persona of like being humble and kind, and if I was to self-aggrandize, I would say in a way, and I still do this nowadays. I say it in a way that's like a joke. It's like I kind of mean it, but it's also a joke. So it's like, oh, people laugh. I also get self-aggrandized. Everybody wins.
So, thank you for that. That's very interesting. So when was the point that you were diagnosed with narcissistic personality in all of this? Because I'm assuming that you've had a diagnosis.
Yes. So I don't think I was officially diagnosed, but the first time it was brought up actually when I was 16. Um, I had a violent episode towards my family, and I was forced into therapy. It was brought up when I was 16, so I was like, who cares? That's probably not true. Like, whatever. I just dismissed it. But it was always kind of in the back of my head after that. As I went on, I think it was around. I think I entered therapy willingly when I was I entered it willingly a couple times, but this is the time that stuck. When I was around 19, I want to say. I exited a relationship and entered into a relationship with another girl who I was on and off with for a long time, who we were very bad for each other. That ended in a garbage fire.
Yeah.
And but like I entered therapy to prove to this girl, be like, hey, look, I'm working on myself. Look how healthy I am. But once it ended, I literally went to one session. We broke up afterwards. So it was like great. But I stayed in because I was like, why did I throw away that previous relationship that was objectively good for me for this woman who like we like just destroy each other. And so I ended up staying in, and after 2 years or so, when I was around 21, I was like officially diagnosed.
And what therapy did you have originally?
It's classic psychoanalysis with an emphasis on CBT. I think there'd be better options for me in forms of treatment, but it's like it took so long to get to the point that I am with my therapist at this point. I'm like, whatever.
Oh, so you still have the same therapist now that you had back then? That's
Yes.
right. So is it purely just psychotherapy, or do you take any form of medication for narcissistic personality disorder?
So I do take medication because I also have comorbid ADHD and PTSD. So I take medication for my ADHD. I used to take mood stabilizers and antipsychotics and antidepressants, stuff like that. But I just kind of decided that I wanted to be able to function with like minimal amounts of medication.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, don't worry if you don't want to go into this at all, but just touched on the so the PTSD and the ADHD element.
Yeah.
Were they before or after the narcissistic personality disorder?
ADHD is what has like it's a neurological disorder.
Yeah,
And
that's always been there, right?
Yeah, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
I have some. Sorry, I have some contentions with my therapist around when the PTSD developed, because my therapist thinks the majority of my PTSD happened when I was in childhood. I think the majority of it happened when I worked at a prison for a few years. But I would say that I would say the starting signs of PTSD probably did start around the same time that my NPD did, because how I view personality disorders is basically just kind of a advanced form of like PTSD.
Yeah. So you say you worked out of prison?
Yeah, I worked in a prison. Yes.
Oh wow, that's interesting. What were you doing in the prison?
I was a corrections officer, or colloquially, I was a prison guard.
Gosh, I bet that was difficult work.
Interestingly enough, it what the see like I was just talking about this the other day, like it was like I saw a lot of fucked up shit in the prison. I'm not going to lie, but like when I was doing the job itself, it didn't bother me. I was like completely fine. It's when I left the prison that like that stuff started to actually affect me and my life. Because like when you become accustomed to 8 hours a day, constantly being on guard, looking out for danger and stuff like that, your body doesn't fucking know what to do when you're just in a calm situation.
That's
So
so
honestly,
true.
like the prison itself was way better than not being in the prison afterwards.
Yeah, but you were just on a constant fight or flight mode. I guess super hyper vigilant in your
Okay.
normal life, which obviously isn't very helpful when you're trying to just live a normal life and you're just constantly anxious and paranoid and on edge. So
I,
that's understandable.
like literally, like one of my PTSD triggers is so at the end of so during count we would like be like rolling and we'd have to shut all the doors, big heavy prison doors to every cell, making sure everyone was in, so we do our count. We also do it at the end of the day. One of my PTSD triggers is actually if I hear a door slam too hard, that can send me into fight or flight mode because it reminds me of that.
So fight or flight mode, would that be like a panic attack?
Some
Or would
people like see. I don't know. I've never described it as a panic attack. I've described what I experience when that happens, and some people would say it's analogous to a panic attack.
yeah,
But I don't know. It's not like I. It's like I would more call it just a state of hypervigilance
like
and like adrenaline.
triggering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. So going back to the narcissistic personality disorder, so obviously you were diagnosed at 19, and you mentioned about being with a girlfriend at the time.
Yes.
And one of the questions that I did want to ask you today was around relationships, because obviously the typical narcissistic personality disorder traits, you would assume that it might go on to affect the relationships that you have and building relationships.
Yeah.
Is that something that you have struggled with? And if so, how have you struggled?
Yeah. So yeah, my MPD often impacts my relationships both platonically and romantically. Generally, like I always say that I make great first impressions. It's all downhill from there.
Um,
Because like the more somebody's around me, the more they can kind of witness my emotional dysregulation, and the less I can like kind of like keep that buried down. Especially when like I start to become vulnerable with people, or like their vulnerability comes up, I will like subconsciously like start lashing out at them to get them away from me, because I hate the idea of people like I'm like utterly convinced that if people see who I really am, in quotes, I don't even know what that would even look like. They'll hate me. So I try to push people away, and I don't want people to see me like that. So like very often, so in most of my relationships, it kind of takes my romantic relationships always kind of take on a similar kind of structure, where I will start the relationship thinking that they're the best person ever, that we're soulmates, et cetera, et cetera. Um, then I'll start to have like doubts, because I'm like, well, if this isn't my soul, because like nobody can meet those expectations, obviously. So I have these doubts, being like, oh, if not my soulmate, well, I'm missing out on the perfect person and stuff like that. And then things can get even worse when I feel like they experience me being vulnerable, and then I'll start lashing out, and they'll see like how like moody I am.
mm.
And that's why my longest relationship was like 8 months or so.
And that, and you haven't, when was the last time that you were in a relationship?
Officially like 7 or 8 months ago, I want to say officially.
And you're not in that one anymore.
No,
And how long did that one last?
that was the longest one. That was the
That
like
was
eight.
the longest one. That was a 7 or 8 month one. And that,
Yes,
and did that end because of the reasons that you've just mentioned?
yes, and hands down. I was, and like, and just, and like, and I do want to emphasize the fact that like, man, I could be, when I'm like lashing out at people, try to push them away like that, I can get cruel. I was, I, I have a lot of regrets about how that went down. I'll say.
Do you mind talking a little bit about what that might look like?
Yeah, I can, like, it's like I'm looking for any reason for the relationship to be bad and broken, and
Mm.
then oftentimes, sometimes blaming them for that. Um, like I'll get very self-destructive in these relationships, trying to push them away and trying to regulate myself at the same time, and then but also I fear abandonment. So then like they'll become this back and forth of me pushing them away, and then making desperate attempts, maybe not desperate attempts,
Uh,
but trying to like make up for it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like with that relationship, it was like there was this. So basically, me and that person dated previously for a while.
Yeah.
We broke up, then started dating again, and but during the first run of the relationship, I had cheated on her. And that was brought up, and it was a point of contention in the relationship for a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember like once like she brought it up, and I was so sick of it being brought up that I just started accusing her of like abandoning me and like being a bad partner and stuff like that. It was like not I don't think I yelled, but I was very condescending and very um very just like I was cruel. I'm not proud of how that went.
So the when you say that obviously that you cheated, is that, I'm asking this because I genuinely don't know the answer to it.
Yeah.
Is that something that narcissists will typically do?
So I actually read a really interesting study on this recently.
Yeah.
And so there is an association between infidelity and narcissism. However,
Yeah.
that relationship is basically almost entirely determined by the narcissist's attachment style. Narcissists who have a dismissive avoidant attachment style are slightly more likely to cheat, but like not really statistically significant. If they have a preoccupied attachment style, on the other hand, they're far more likely to cheat. Which I like, from my perspective, I was like, well, that's interesting. You'd think that if I had a dismissive attachment style, it'd be like, well, you don't matter, so I can cheat whoever I want. I don't care. But I started
Yeah.
thinking about it more, about what motivations behind infidelity could be. And for me, I cheated twice in my life. The only time, and like one time, it was because I was convinced the person was my soulmate. It was a whole thing. It was an emotional affair. Then the second time was an impulsive, drunk decision that was just to regulate self-esteem. But I started thinking about like why somebody with a preoccupied attachment style would, and it's like, and to me, I think what happens is they feel slighted in some way, and they feel, and thus they're able to, and since they're so preoccupied with this person, they're much more in tune to these perceived slights, and so they will try to cheat to either level the playing field, so to speak, or to get revenge for some other action, or feel justified in the infidelity because of the
Yeah.
alleged transgression. But that's
Yeah.
my personal interpretation of that study.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Um, so in terms of the relationship from the female's perspective,
Mhm.
how do they deal with it when you tell them that you've got narcissistic personality disorder? I'm assuming that's something that maybe you tell them.
Yes.
And
So,
yeah,
oh,
sorry, go
sorry.
on.
No,
No,
you're
no,
fine.
go on. Go
But
on.
yeah, there. So for me, I basically have kind of a rule nowadays that like before I become like official with somebody, quote unquote, like I'll tell them because I feel like they deserve to know what they're getting into. I do know a lot of people who have MPD though who like hide it for life, who just do not want to. They just do not want to like. They
For
don't
anyone.
want the backlash of people knowing because I have had the experience of people do start to view everything I do through this lens of manipulation or through malice. And while I can be hurtful at times, usually it's not intentional. Um, so there's basically two kind of responses that I'm kind of accustomed to getting. One is just kind of kind of like a little bit of an interest, but ultimately an indifference towards it. It's like, I guess that makes sense, whatever. Or what I just described of they prescribe malice to everything I do.
Yeah. So in terms of the actual relationship, like when you're in a relationship with this person, how would the female react to some of the ways that you behave?
Looking back on it, usually they just don't know how to react.
Yeah.
Is generally what I see. Um, of like, I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll feel hurt and stuff like that, of course, but generally they just. I think because we come at it from such different like ways of viewing the world, they can't really wrap their minds around why I'm acting the way I am, or why I'm reacting the way that I am, and so they kind of like a lot of times I see them just kind of shut down.
Yeah. Do you want to be in a relationship? Like, do you want that?
Yeah, it's complicated because yes, I do. But there's nothing more I crave in the world than having a genuine connection with somebody. I find it very hard to connect with people, and for most of my life, I've like craved and envied that. But but rationally speaking, with all the experience that I have, I'm like, well, is am I ever going to be to a point where that's healthy for me and the individuals that ever actually will make me happy? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I have mixed feelings on it. It's similarly with like having the idea of having children. I want children, but at the same time, I know that I'm going to pass on a genetic predisposition to the disorder, and also I don't know if I'll ever be healthy enough to be able to raise those kids properly.
Mm.
And so I think that ethically, there's no real. I can't justify in my mind having children.
That must be really hard, or is it something that you've just come to accept? You seem to say it in a way that's like you have accepted it almost, that this is the reality.
It's complicated. I kind of go back and forth between grieving it and just kind of accepting it. But I
Yeah.
would say, as a general rule, I have accepted it. I know this is just how I'm going to live my life. There isn't a cure, quote unquote. I can go into remission, but my internal experience is probably going to stay pretty much the same. I'm never going to be completely normal. So there's a melancholy there. There's a sadness over like how my life could have been if I wouldn't have gone through the things I did in childhood, or if I didn't just have the genes to make me all fucked up, right? But by and large, I feel like I have accepted it.
How long do you think it's taken to get to a point where you have accepted it?
I mean, it's. I would say it's still a process, right? I
Still
don't
a
think I'm ever going to
process.
fully accept it. I would say that like I would say like pretty shortly because like I always knew something was off about me, and I was always and like I knew my tendency to for substance abuse as well. So I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that it may not be a realistic possibility for me. Um, but so I would say pretty shortly after my diagnosis, I started taking the steps to like really accept that.
So you just mentioned substance abuse
Mhm.
addiction. Is that again? Is that part of narcissistic personality disorder?
It's very commonly associated. Yes, I think it's like over half of people with NPD have a comorbid substance abuse issue. Because I mean, it sucks living like this, so it's like it makes sense, right?
What else? What else are you gonna do?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, I think it's what was it? I mean, it's funny. Like the latent stress levels in people with narcissistic personality disorder are actually higher than those with generalized anxiety disorder. So it kind of makes sense that like they kind of want to numb that at times.
When did you start abusing substances?
Ooh, fuck. I don't think anyone. Good question. I don't think anybody here. I don't think anybody's ever asked me before on these platforms. I was 15. I want to say.
And what was
Uh,
it that you started abusing first?
Alcohol at first. Alcohol was always my drug of choice. Hell, it still is to this day. I would say it was, and then that turned into a phase. Like I went through basically. I never enjoyed weed. I always thought marijuana was just like not enjoyable.
Yeah.
Um, but I always, but it was originally alcohol, and then that transformed into cocaine, psychedelic. I'll be honest. I still do
No,
psychedelic
yeah.
like once a
Be
year or so.
honest. Like that's what
But
this podcast is about.
yeah,
Like, and thank you for being honest and like
I
being able to talk about this. I always feel like slightly uncomfortable asking certain questions like, am I taking this too far? But I think it's so important to talk about this sort of
oh yeah,
stuff. It's real life. So many people suffer with
yeah,
substance addiction and so many people don't talk about it.
yeah,
So and I've had two of my guests now talk about mushrooms
yeah.
and their experience with mushrooms. And actually one of the guys that I spoke to had an extremely life-changing experience with mushrooms, and it genuinely changed his entire perspective
Mm,
and allowed him to recover. It wasn't the reason why he recovered, but it was the catalyst to his
yeah.
recovery. And so I think raising awareness to drugs like that is important
For
because
sure.
um
Because I actually have a story regarding mushrooms actually, but I and so well to wrap up kind of like yeah I was addicted to cocaine for a while. But I've been clean for a long time though, um, and when it comes to and like I do occasionally use psychedelics still. I don't really I feel like a lot of people. I think psychedelics can be very helpful for people, but I feel like it can be maybe not overstated, but I feel like the safety of it can be overstated because I've known people who have had very positive experiences with psychedelics, and then on the other hand, very negative, where it's
yeah,
affected them for a long time. And I
yeah,
think there's a way to engage with these substances that can be helpful for people, but I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, this is just a great thing. When it's like, no, it has to be used in a very responsible and educated manner. Some people aren't going to react well to it. Interestingly enough, though, I my only time I've ever felt guilt was when I was on mushrooms. It was
really, because you can't regulate emotions, right? So these
yeah.
are things that emotions you've never felt.
Some of them, yes, yeah, and
It's
like was because
crazy.
for a long time I thought I felt guilt because I assumed that like shame and guilt were kind of the same thing. But then I remember I was tripping on shrooms. I was with a girl who like I treated her fucking bad in the past. I'm not gonna lie, but we were friends at that point and we were fine. She and I remember like I was just sitting there like tripping balls, and I just started thinking about how I treated her and stuff like that. And I remember just like looking at her and being like just like I was. It's like I was horrified at how my actions had affected her, which was very because with shame, it's like because I could think back on that and I would like be like I'm a terrible person for having done that. I never. It was never about her though. It was never about recognizing how I impacted her, and that was bizarre. I was like,
Yeah.
I it was.
I bet that in itself made you feel a little bit scared, terrified in that trip. You're like, what is this new
I was like,
emotion that
this
I'm
is
feeling?
weird.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, by the way, guilt way better than shame. You guys can't complain about guilt anymore. I know what it's like now. Shame is way worse.
So, would you, on that topic, would you say sorry to someone and feel sorry? Because guilt is like you're looking at this, you're saying that you're having this trip, you're looking at this girl, and you're feeling so bad about everything you've done.
Yes.
The immediate response to that would be to say, "I'm sorry."
I that's the only time I've ever said sorry, and I meant it in the way that other people mean it, I would say.
Wow. So you would
Um,
usually just say sorry because you know that's what people want to hear, not because you
yes.
genuinely mean it.
Yeah. Generally speaking, it's like,
Wow.
even if I know I did something wrong, it's like, if I say sorry, it's usually just kind of like, I want the situation to be over. I want forgiveness so I don't feel like I'm a bag of shit, basically.
It's for your
I
own self-esteem, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so generally speaking, I'm just kind of like, oh, if I say sorry, the situation passes more or less.
And
That
I'm a
was the
good
only time
person
I've ever said
again.
it, like
Yeah,
many.
and that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
So, that will lead into platonic relationships.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you've struggled to have any real connections in your life.
Yeah.
But obviously, romantic relationships are probably a lot more difficult in any sense than platonic. So how has it affected those platonic relationships?
Platonic relationships, we'll see. That's the thing. It's a lot easier to keep people at arm's length when they're platonic. So I have managed to maintain quite a few long-term platonic friendships over the years. But I do run into similar struggles about people seeing my self-esteem well, yeah, I mean that too. My self-esteem dysregulation and emotional dysregulation, me lashing out at people, me perceiving slights where there are none, me being paranoid about people betraying me and stuff like that. I've kept a good number of individual friendships like for many many years since like high school and some of them even since middle school. But generally, my life kind of has a pattern of me having a friend group that I am like one of the ringleaders of, in quotes, that I use to regulate my self esteem. Something happens, I lash out, and like it just kind of tumbles down from there. And I kind of spend a lot of my life kind of hopping from friend group to friend group.
That must be really difficult.
It's more annoying than anything. Because again, like a lot of these really not all my friendships are like this. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of my friendships are for the purpose of like self esteem regulation. So I lose these people, and it's more of just kind of like, oh well, I'm not getting the attention I need. I feel shitty, but I don't. There's not some deep loss there.
Right, that's insane. Like, I mean, it's so good that you're able like to speak to someone who's just open about it. Like, this is genuinely what you experience.
Yeah.
What about your parents? How
What
was
about
that? How has that been? You know, growing up with this, obviously,
yeah?
you're saying that you quite like quite anger issues, obviously ADHD as well, substance abuse. How did that?
So my family is full of fucking crazies. Is what I should. I'll start off with.
Oh, okay.
My sister actually has borderline personality disorder. She was also diagnosed with a conduct disorder when she was younger, which, for those of you who don't know, eventually develops into antisocial personality disorder if it's not treated. But she was my entire life that I've known her, she has not been sober. So I'm not sure if like a lot of that behavior, criminal behavior, was driven by substances or just because of who she was. Very hard to say. But
she's engaged in criminal behavior. You're
most of my childhood, she was in and out of prison or rehab. Yeah.
And she's a bit older than you.
No, she's younger. Weirdly enough.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It's funny. She actually is the person who got me hooked on nicotine. She started smoking when she was like really young, and got me when I was like 17 years old, addicted to cigarettes, which is hilarious. But yeah.
Wow.
So the dynamics. So she added one hell of a dynamic as well. My parents. So basically, when I was a child, I was 5 years old when my parents separated. Before then, I don't remember much, and it was generally speaking better, I would say. I mean, there was a lot of fighting, but whatever. After that, both my parents my mom left my dad for a woman, and my dad very quickly started dating other women, and they were very much more involved with those other partners than their own children.
Yeah.
Eventually, there was a lot of violence, a lot of yelling, a lot of emotional dysregulation from my sister and me's part. My dad has very bad OCD and is potentially autistic, so he also struggled with anger regulation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which at times was physical, is what it is. And that's why I always lock every door that I like. It's funny. I walk into a friend's house knowing other people are behind me. I'll shut the door and lock it just out of habit, because one of my dad's OCD things was he had to check every lock in the house 3 times before he went to bed.
Wow.
But and then it would I would say there was a lot that went to my childhood. It's impossible to cover the entirety of it, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. But it was a not pleasant experience growing up.
And do you have a relationship with your parents now, or?
I do. It would I spent a lot of my life resenting them, especially watching them interact with their new families and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I started worrying about their childhoods and how that impacted them, and those were also those were shitty childhoods as well. And I also realized, and I have also seen in them a lot of growth and willingness to grow, and just generally being better people. And so it's I do still struggle with this a lot of is it fair to hate them when I can see that they had their own struggles and that they have work to be better, even if I was friendly fire, so to speak.
That's so interesting, because that's been one of the biggest things for me in terms of healing from certain things in my past, has been forgiving the people that have done what they've done.
Yeah.
And being do you know what? You've had your shit going on. You've had your experiences, your childhood, whatever you've been through, and that was your shit. And unfortunately, I was the punching bag for that.
Yeah.
But what we forget when we're about our parents or whoever it is in our lives that are older than us, they're doing life for the first time as well. And nobody knows what they're doing. Genuinely, nobody has a clue what they're doing in this life, I don't think. I mean, we're all just kind of making it up as we go along. And so, yeah, you're right. And that's a really good way of seeing it, especially when you've been clearly affected quite heavily by your childhood, is to be able to look at it and be actually, they were just doing the best with what they had.
Yeah. It's there's so few people in the world that are just intrinsically malicious, who just want to hurt people for the sake of hurting people.
Yeah.
And it's those people exist, sure. But I would say, if we were to take abusers, I would say 99 of them out of 100 weren't intending to be malicious.
No, never. It mostly goes back to childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And even if you look at serial killers,
Yeah.
a lot of they have experienced sexual abuse or some sort or some physical abuse, whatever it is, and that's learnt behavior that
Yeah.
they go on to then do as an adult. No,
Yeah.
people don't realize that.
When I was young, when I was in middle school, I had this weird fixation with serial killers, and specifically ones that were cannibalistic. I was weird, but I remember
That
reading
you,
this book
yeah,
about Jeffrey Dahmer, and reading his childhood. It's like, well, I can see how how what happened to you growing up went on to kind of paint who you became. Not, and of course, that doesn't justify murdering and eating people, of course,
no, but
but
I think people who have experienced trauma in their life often think differently, and
yeah,
I've very often thought in that way.
yeah,
I don't think people are born murderers. I do think that people have a predisposition. I
yes,
think that there's a genetic predisposition for sure in some disorders, definitely. And
yeah,
so you could be a born murderer in the sense that you do have a gene there, but I think that something typically will trigger it. Not always, but there is an environmental element that triggers that, and that might be abuse or some sort of traumatic
agreed.
event in
Um,
childhood.
Something very interesting is, I don't know if you ever heard of James Fallon, but
I haven't.
so he's a
Who is that?
neurologist who,
Okay.
due to one of his own studies, he found out he was a psychopath. He had no history of violence, no particularly like negative. Like, I mean, he had some like socially bad behavior and stuff like that, but he was a very well-adjusted individual, and he had no idea he was a psychopath until he basically did the study, and he put his own. It's funny. He describes it as like he none of the brain scans were labeled, but he's going through them and he finds one. He's like, "Whoa, this guy's like the worst of the worst. Who is this guy? He must have murdered like a billion people," and it was him, right? And he had no clue. And I think that goes to show kind of like how you can have a predisposition to like maybe
Yeah.
not feeling things very strongly, or being
Yeah.
callous, or maybe potentially even sadistic. But if you're raised in the right environment, that those things will
Yeah.
you'll
Well,
still be a functioning individual.
exactly. There's so many studies looking at twins as well who have been separated at birth.
Yeah,
One of them's gone on to be a straight A student and be a doctor. There is actually a really famous study, and I can't remember it. And then the other one's a juvenile and just goes on to just live a really bad life, substance
yeah,
abuse, and same genes but totally different environments.
yes, yeah.
So both
That,
might have had that predisposition to go down that route, but the other guy had a different family, and so ended up being a doctor.
yeah,
So it's really interesting. Um, so in terms of narcissistic personality disorder, obviously we're talking about a lot of the bad things here,
of course.
but are there any positives that you can take from the disorder?
So, it's interesting. I would say that there's things that I find beneficial that other people may not. For example, my lack of empathy, I think, can actually be a positive in a lot of ways. At least if used, I feel like all traits of personality disorders, if they're used in the right ways, they can be positives. But oftentimes we don't know how to use them correctly. But
Yeah.
for example, my lack of empathy, the I can hear somebody, cry their heart out about like whatever the hell's going on in their life. And a lot of people may be overwhelmed by that emotionality or not know how to react. Meanwhile, I'm completely unaffected by it. I don't have any response to it emotionally. And I can try to just like plan out in my mind the best way to kind of help them through the
Ah,
situation. And that being, and like and now on the other hand, once I do that, I feel gratified because, oh, like they think, like they're like, oh my god, you're so wise and kind, etc., etc. They're bolstering my self-esteem. I help them. A symbiotic relationship. It's awesome. I would say I would say that's definite. I would say that the way I engage in, though it's stressful, that the way that I engage in talking to people is advantageous, just because like in my mind it's like a fucking tree of things that I can say, and basically covering my bases in terms of like, okay, if I say this, they're going to assume this about me, so I have to say this in order to kind of accommodate for that.
Oh, wow.
A constant calculation to come off the best that I can. And while that can be distressing to me because I am so concerned with what people think about me, I think it does leave me make better impressions on people. Another interesting one is that people with cluster B disorders, we are actually better at reading emotions in the purely through the eyes of people than laymen are. I think it's like there was a standardized test, and it measured, and when it measured, I think people with cluster B disorders scored around 80% on it, while normal people score about 60% on the same test. So I feel like that can be very beneficial.
So you don't. So body language as well, you can obviously tell from, or is it just, or is it mainly eyes that you would look at?
I haven't read any research about body language itself, but I personally think
so interesting. Like you can look at someone's eyes and feel how they're feeling.
Well, for me, know how they're feeling, in fairness, but yeah, like I can just it's just, it was fascinating because I remember taking this test with me and some of my friends, and I am just like going through them being like, oh, it's obviously this, and they're like, how the fuck did you get that
That's crazy.
But it can be negative too, though, because we're also prone to so like as a narcissist, if you show a negative emotion, because of my self-centered frame point, I'm assuming that that negative emotion is because of something that I did, and that has led to me kind of being like like I remember once I was at a birthday party, and one of my friends there, I remember like looking at him, and I interpreted that something was off about him, and no, and like I was, and I was like, I became convinced that he was mad at me for something that I did, or that he thought I did. But that's the thing. I got angry because I was like, I didn't do anything. Why are you mad at me? Why are you upset with me? I remember just like asking the people next to me, being like, hey, do you think Sean is upset? And then like them being like, I don't really notice, but yeah, I guess he seems kind of off. And I was like, that confirms it. And I remember I was like being towards the end of it, I was being dismissive towards him, and he was like, "Hey man, are you all right? Are we all right?" And I was like, "Are we?" And I flicked him off and stormed out of the building.
And he's just like, "What have I done?"
Oh my god! Like as soon as I left, I was then like my friend texted me being like, "Hey dude, I don't think he was upset with you," and I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
"Oh."
Oh
And
dear.
like he calls me, he's like, "Hey, are we good?" And I was like, "Yeah, sorry about that. Want to hang out?"
But
It's
your
so
friends
stupid.
know that about you, so like they understand, right?
To varying degrees, yeah. Some of them are more understanding of it than others. I have one friend who I feel like understands me. There's two friends I can think of off the top of my head that understand me the best, and I think the one that handles me the best is the one that kind of says like, Jacob, I don't understand you, but why I can handle your shit is because I know that I don't understand you. And a lot of people think they
Fair
do,
enough.
and that leads them to make bad assumptions about it.
It's fair enough. At least it's honest.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to ask you before I forget the question about work, and like, has it affect you in the workplace? Obviously, when you've got friends, you've got relationships, you've got family, but they're very different. Like when you've got somebody telling you what to do in the workplace.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've always had a really. So I want to preface this with saying that like narcissists very often call on hierarchy to kind of regulate their self-esteem. Like everything, I view everybody and everything through the lens of a hierarchy of who's better than who, right? And in a workplace, you have a superior who is objectively higher up on a hierarchy than you are. And
Yes.
for me, how this is manifested is that like it makes me almost fearful of their opinions of me because if like let's say I have a disagreement with you or somebody that is a friend of mine that I view on a relatively speaking even playing field, if I get upset, if you judge me or something, I can be like, well, they're beneath me anyway. They don't mean anything. Blah 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 blah. Like I can kind of protect myself from the shame of that judgment by lowering your status in the hierarchy that I perceive. However, somebody that's above me, their opinion matters the world. Um, and so I can't like put them down as effectively. So I mean, I remember once I was, and so like that makes me even skittish towards supervisors sometimes. I remember once I got a relatively speaking kind of negative feedback from a supervisor. I left work and hid in my room because I was like so embarrassed and ashamed. I literally just left.
And that's the rejection, isn't it? Like
It's like like if somebody who's higher up in the hierarchy thinks low of you, then like you are objectively lower, if that makes sense.
and that does nothing for your self-esteem.
It fucks me up. Like it fucks me up hard.
So obviously you've got the mental side of it, where
Yeah.
but how do and like what how you feel, but how does it affect you on and outwardly? So how you see yourself from a physical, like aesthetically, because obviously in society, like a lot of people will toss around the term he's a narcissist. For example, as a female, if you're dating a guy that goes to the gym all the time,
Yeah.
has all of his pictures on Instagram with his top off, that his six pack out, and he's following thousands of girls on Instagram, you're probably gonna the term that girls would probably use is, oh, he's such a narcissist.
Right.
So, and that's without thinking about obviously the traits that what we're talking about, the traits that you speak about is actually more about how you act, like
Yeah.
from a mental perspective. So yeah, what is it actually like to be a narcissist in terms of how you view yourself?
So that's interesting. So like, well, because first of all, I want to point out like, because like I do feel like honestly, I feel like the biggest tragedy about NPD is the name itself because there's association with the term narcissism, which is just not accurate to the lived experience of NPD. I've literally like said before that I think if like I don't know, I like the term narcissist, so I'm hesitant about wanting to change the name. But if it were to kind of take the similar route that BPD has, where some people call it emotionally unstable disorder, I would call it like like self-esteem dysregulation disorder or something. But either way, the but like yeah, like I always draw this line because people like to say that like oh on like there's a scale of narcissism. At the low end you have people who are very insecure, and at the extreme end you have people who are pathologically narcissistic, and I disagree completely with that. Because here's
Yeah.
the thing, healthy narcissism, if you're on the higher scale of it, there's a lot of self-love there. Like if you mess up, you're very forgiving of yourself, you're like, oh well, you tried your best, whatever. My internal monologue never reflects that. My internal monologue is like, if I mess up, I'm like, man, you're so much better than this. Like you're superior to all these people. How'd you mess up like an idiot like that? And there's a lot of self-hate talk that happens. And I view like pathological narcissism on the like honestly the opposite end of healthy narcissism, of the absolute lowest that you can go to in terms of healthy narcissism.
Mhm.
I've always had, and though I can be very self-absorbed, I'm self-aggrandizing, I seek attention, I've never viewed myself as like a good person. I've always felt like I was inherently bad and flawed and not good enough, stuff like that. And my attempts to regulate my attempts to prove myself otherwise is what colors most of my interactions. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of times I do feel like I'm better than everybody else, right? But
Mm.
even when I am in the throes of my grandiosity and I think I'm a god, there's still like self-hate there. There's still a lot of self-hate there.
Yeah, that must be really difficult to live with. I can't imagine what it must be like to just hate yourself like what sounds like 90% of the time.
It's interesting because it's like it's always interesting when people say things like that because like don't get me wrong, it does suck living with this, but at the same time it's like it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, it's like terrible to live with just because it feels so normal to me. It feels so normal to have
Yeah,
those levels of self-hate.
those thoughts. So I guess so in terms of how you manage this on a day-to-day basis, aside from therapy and medication,
Hmm.
is there anything that you do? And if there isn't, that's fine. Like this is, but is there, if there is somebody that's listening to this who actually might be struggling with something similar.
So yeah, so I want to preface this with being like, listen, I'm not healed. I'm still in the throes of this damn disorder and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So other people would probably have better advice, but but I do have a few things that like generally I kind of fall back on. I would say the first thing that I do is I'm constantly questioning my own perceptions of like why people do the things that they do or why I'm having the reaction that I do. I have to constantly be like, Jacob, is your narcissism playing out? Sometimes I'll be like, it is. I don't care because I'm still right. And it's a whole thing. But like
Yeah.
I do attempt very often to like challenge those beliefs and my preconceptions and instincts in regards to people. That sucks when I'm proven right because it sucks when I'm proven right because then I'm like, because then it's like confirmation bias and it kind of enforces some of these beliefs, but whatever. I would say the other thing that's helped me a lot is especially when I was younger, I don't read as much as I used to. I wish I did, but like I delved very deeply into stoicism when I was younger because like stoicism is all about like understanding that you can only control your own reactions and your own mindsets. You can't control the world around you, which I think is very good for narcissism on two levels. Of one, not trying to control everything around you, and then two, being able to handle your emotional dysregulation. So stoicism helped me a lot when I was growing up.
And is there anything that you do now, like is there anything that you would engage in on a daily basis, like that helps as like an outlet almost?
Drinking.
That you're
um,
be honest.
I mean,
Like there's no. We're not here to
yeah,
sugarcoat things.
no, yeah, for sure.
If that's genuinely how you manage it at the moment.
I mean, like I will say that like I would hesitate to call myself an alcoholic, but I definitely have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And that can be an outlet a lot of the times. But in terms of like genuine healthy outlets, I go back and forth between being able to maintain those. Like I used to go on walks daily, and that was honestly very helpful. But like generally, it's just so hard to like get a lot of this shit out, and I'm not very good at it.
How do you so you would say you drink alcohol like most days, right?
Yeah.
How do you sustain a normal life doing that, or is it just became the norm that you just do it every day and that's it? Yeah.
I mean, it's like the I mean, it's just kind of like I mean, and it comes and goes in waves, but generally speaking, it's just kind of like it's just like I get all the stuff that I need to get done, and then at the end of the day, when everything's finished up, I drink.
Yeah. And will you drink socially ever with friends, or is it more of like a
I yeah, I drink with friends. Like it makes it, and that's another way that like it kind of cope that I can kind of a way that like it's a coping mechanism is that like I'm constantly afraid of like what people are thinking about me, constantly trying to calculate stuff. It makes me very anxious, and alcohol kind of lessens that pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense. A lot of people use alcohol in social situations if they deal with social anxiety. It's very normal. And what I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I think it's important is that this is just an example. When people see homeless people on the street and they ask them for alcohol, money for alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and the person says no, but they've probably got a bag with a bottle of wine and they're going home after their mediocre, stressful day at work to go and sit with a bottle of wine and watch TV. And that's socially acceptable. But that person that's struggling on the street and wants a bottle of wine because it's cold, because they're probably suffering with PTSD and whatever other mental health issues, then they just want to numb the pain in that moment. That's not okay. That's socially unacceptable.
Yeah,
and so
that's a really good way of putting it, actually.
And it's really interesting. And so when people judge people for drinking to numb the pain, people forget to look inwardly and think about how often do they use alcohol to numb their seemingly small pain, which might have been a little bit of a stressful day at work, when actually there's people who suffer that on such a huge scale. Of course they're going to turn to alcohol in excess,
I feel like there's a way to kind of be able to simultaneously acknowledge the harm that excessive drinking can do, and also not judge the people who are turning to that to kind of cope with their day-to-day situation.
Yeah. There should never be judgment ever on stuff like that. People deal with things in different ways. And if your thing right now is alcohol, then that's your thing. And maybe vaping as well.
Yeah.
The vapes. So before we go, I just wanted to touch a little bit on your Instagram page, because you've got quite a lot of followers on there. Has this been something that you've been doing for quite a long time now?
About a year and a half, I want to say. Because my YouTube, I started a year and a half ago. And then I think it's been about a year since I started my TikTok, which has like 130,000 followers right now.
Wow.
And I'm not exactly sure when I started my Instagram. I don't really like Instagram, so I don't post on it very often. But yeah, I think that was probably, it was a few months at, like, I don't remember exactly, because I started it because my friend Tess, who is also a diagnosed narcissist who runs some accounts like this, she pressured me into making an account. So yeah, like between a year and a half ago.
And what was the reason behind starting the page?
I was in a bad space in my life. I wanted somewhere to vent.
An outlet.
And I was also very frustrated at the misinformation around narcissism that kind of polluted everything.
Yeah.
And hell, I want attention. Sure. Over time that's changed a little bit in terms of me being able to kind of like recognize that being able to kind of see, like, it's been interesting because every time that I do something nice in my real life, I always am like, oh, that felt fake. Like, I'm only doing that because for attention or look good, whatever. But when I'm accidentally helping people, like, there isn't room to say that, oh, I did that for the purpose of feeling good about myself because I did it on accident. I'm educating people. If people are helped by it, like, I didn't even, I wasn't even trying. So it's allowed me to kind of explore actual feelings of altruism towards
helping people. Yeah. I think that your content's, the best thing about your content is like the humor side to it.
Yeah.
And how it's like, it's really important things that you're talking about in terms of like how narcissism is portrayed. And you talk about how you experience narcissism, but it's that humorous twist to it. And I think that, and it's great. So anyone listening, definitely go and check out your Instagram page. I will leave a link in the description as well. And is your TikTok also the Nameless Narcissist?
Yes, all of my accounts go by the Nameless Narcissist, YouTube, TikTok, whatever.
And and YouTube as well. Have you got any sort of plans with the Nameless Narcissist brand? Like, is there anywhere that you'd like it to go, or are you just happy to keep posting content?
It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently because, like, at the end of the day, I don't want to fixate on my mental disorder for the rest of my life, right? So, like, that's led me to be like, okay, well, if I do want to eventually not do this anymore, what is this going to turn into? What I would like to do with it is eventually, create a group of people with various personality disorders and have kind of a holistic kind of perspective of every single one. And also, I want to, because I have a few interviews with experts on my channel that I'm very, very proud of, or like me speaking at conferences or universities, whatever. And I want to get the academic side of it in as well to make kind of a holistic kind of resource for information on personality disorders.
Yeah, that'd be really good. Sounds like a very good plan. I hope that works out.
Yeah,
It's
me
difficult.
too.
What do you do as your normal day-to-day job?
Oh my God, this is embarrassing. Because it's funny because, like, I'll talk about, I used to be in the military, I worked at a prison, I worked in a nursing home, whatever, college. And nowadays I fucking do DoorDash. Like, I do nothing.
DoorDash, what's that?
I guess Europe might not have that. Basically, it's basically a food delivery service that will basically you order food from whatever restaurant, and this service will go in.
Yeah,
Right?
delivery, Uber, we have here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically like
Okay.
Uber Eats. Yeah.
Well, if that's what you enjoy doing, and you can also continue to do, I guess do you know what? After all of that work that you've done, that's probably the perfect job. Prisons and army, like,
Yeah.
you just need a nice job where you can deliver food to people, not have to deal with human interactions too much,
Yes.
and any form of triggers, and just go home after your day and chill without having to think about your day too much.
That's literally what, like, the combination of not having a supervisor, of having flexibility, so I can maintain all of this, obviously, and then also just the fact of like I can just listen to music and drive. It's fine.
Yeah, completely can see why you would do that after
Yeah.
those pretty stressful jobs. But anyway, Jacob, it's been so nice to talk to you today. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Of course.
I do hope that whoever's listening has changed their perspective a little bit on narcissistic personality disorder, because that is really the goal. That's what your whole page is about.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to get you on here today, for me to learn a little bit more about the disorder as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do hope that anybody listening has seen it in a different light. And good luck with everything. I do hope that you end up with this personality disorder community researcher thing that you want to do.
Right.
And yeah, no, I've really enjoyed speaking to you today.
It was a pleasure coming on. Thanks for having me. And I definitely hope that, like, this did give some people some insight.
I hope so too. Thank you. So much for listening to the episode today. I hope this episode has resonated with you and offered insights, comfort, and most importantly, the knowledge that you are not alone. Remember, your mental health journey is unique, just like you are. It's okay to have good days. You are strong, resilient, and capable of navigating life's challenges. If you found value in today's episode, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to hear more about specific topics or have any questions, please leave a comment below. We're here to support and empower each other. Together, we can break the stigma surrounding mental health and create a more compassionate and understanding world. If you haven't already, please do check out our Facebook community group, which is a non-judgmental space for you guys to share your stories, experiences, and support each other. As we close the episode, please do remember to take a moment for some self-care, whether it's a deep breath, a walk in nature, or a simple act of kindness to yourself. Remember to nurture your mental well-being after these conversations. Thank you so much for being part of our community. I appreciate you all so, so much. And also, if you are listening and feel like you could have a story to share, please do drop me a Instagram message, email me at info@vitamindose.co, or you can also go to the website and fill in a form at www.vitamindose.co. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.